Everybody's got a phobia: spiders, snakes, small spaces, needles, heights, you name it, someone is afraid of it. When it comes to my daughter, it's an extreme and irrational fear of birds. I mean, yeah, I get it: pointy beaks, sharp talons, cold, round, staring eyes. Whether it's a tiny little sparrow or a strutting pigeon showing up anywhere near her, she will basically freak out and lose her shit. Maybe she was a worm in a past life, who knows? But what I do know is that when it comes to the Decepticons on my shelf, there are two specific ones that she would love to see take a stage dive off into oblivion. After watching the original Transformers cartoon for the very first time, I'm willing to bet that one of the greatest takeaways for most kids was how awesome the Decepticon communications specialist Soundwave was. I mean, what was there not to like? Mysterious masked face,
ominous, monotonous, and heavily effects-laden voice.
Cool and timeless alt mode that would never go out of style. Okay, maybe scratch that last one. And of course, a personal little army that sprang right out of his own chest. And while Soundwave's entourage of little Decepticons has grown considerably over time, there is quite a lot to go over with just the original crew that made their debut in the initial season of the cartoon. First, we had the destructive duo of Rumble, who was blue, and his lesser-known red variant, Frenzy. Next, the silent and stealthy Jaguar, Ravage. And last but not least, the high-flying Condor, Laserbeak, who was actually the first of Soundwave's deployers. Did you know that they were called deployers? I didn't. You learn something new every day. Sorry, who was the first deployer we are introduced to, as he is dispatched by Soundwave to do what he does best, which is to spy on the Autobots back on Cybertron. Of course, back then he wasn't a condor but some sort of little flying saucerish craft with a beak. But that's beside the point. Aside from being the first deployer, okay, yeah, that just doesn't sound right, sorry. Aside from being the first Cassetticon, or minion that we are officially introduced to, I would argue that Laserbeak was the one who made the most impact in the show from the start. I mean, don't get me wrong, Rumble and Ravage did have their moments, but for me, it was all about that chase down between Laserbeak and the Autobots Cliffjumper and Hound. First of all, deployable flying gun, awesome. And secondly, basically kicking Hound's ass. Poor guy, he just really can't catch a break with those tapes. Anyway, I know what most of you are thinking, and no, I did not forget about the other bird in the room, Laserbeak's less popular recolor, Buzzsaw, who despite being released as well in the first year of the toy line, made his debut later on in the second season of the show. And there's a fairly straightforward explanation for this. Aside from the fact that it was pretty much easier to just draw one bird instead of two, as far as the toys were concerned, Buzzsaw was only available as a pack-in with Soundwave. And given that Soundwave basically was an insta-buy for all the kiddies, Hasbro didn't feel the need to promote his accessory on the show. And so top billing went to Laserbeak, who was sold with a curiously blue-colored Frenzy. Just kidding. I'm well aware of the whole Rumble Frenzy color debate. Well, okay, it's not much of a debate. Frenzy is red and Rumble is blue. And if you think otherwise, you're wrong. But back to the birds. As a kid, despite not having the original toy due to not having Soundwave, for some reason I always had a preference for Buzzsaw over Laserbeak, even if I had the knockoff version of the latter. Okay, actually not really a knockoff, but the original micro-change toy that was eventually turned into Laserbeak. And that toy was one of my favorites. Aside from the fact that he was small and compact and could be taken around anywhere, I would argue that this toy was possibly one of the best toys from the original vintage line, given that he was pretty accurate to what we saw in the cartoon. Granted, his alt mode was basically a rectangle, but that's beside the point. As a toy, this guy was awesome. So yeah, despite being basic recolors of the same toy, as far as the tech specs were concerned, both Laserbeak and Buzzsaw had very specific and distinct functions and personalities. Laserbeak is your typical coward who will only engage with the enemy whenever he has an advantage, whether it's due to the element of surprise or dealing with an already injured or incapacitated enemy, which leads to his prime function as an interrogator, a role he takes cruel pleasure in by using his lasers to inflict precise torture to obtain the information that he seeks. Buzzsaw, on the other hand, is the spy, who has quite the bird's eye view, able to pinpoint and photograph a lone thumbtack from 20 miles away. He is also arguably more well equipped for direct combat with his twin mortar cannons and diamond hard micro serrated beak, which he uses to carve up his opponents and from which he gets his name. But as formidable as Buzzsaw sounded, like I said, for the most part, as far as the cartoons were concerned, it was all about Laserbeak, who basically took over Buzzsaw's role as Soundwave's constant companion and the go-to spy for the Decepticons. I guess it was a little harder to explain to kids what an interrogator did. Despite not figuring in any major storyline or episode from my recollection, Laserbeak was a constant presence in the series, being one of the very few Decepticons that never failed Megatron. Although, he did have one moment wherein he came this close to actually killing Optimus Prime. In the episode Divide and Conquer, fearing a bigger ass whooping from his leader Megatron, Laserbeak goes against character and sneaks into the Autobot base as a Minibot shoulder accessory, where an already seriously injured Prime lays on the repair bay surrounded by his Autobots. And before any of them can react, Laserbeak takes flight and fires directly into Prime's open and exposed chest, causing him to explode. How Prime managed to survive is beyond me, but credit to Laserbeak, who inflicted more damage on the mighty Autobot leader than any of his fellow Decepticons had ever done up to that point. Oh, and in Megatron's master plan to fool the Earthlings into thinking the Decepticons were pretty cool guys, Soundwave and company party with some teens at the local gymnasium and Laserbeak shows off his moves. Anyway, while Buzzsaw eventually made his cartoon appearance in the second season, he did even less than Laserbeak, often depicted flying alongside his bird bro and doubling up the damage from above. It's actually in the comics that Buzzsaw did a little bit more and in one instance actually outlasted Laserbeak. In the original Marvel comic, both Laserbeak and Buzzsaw debuted together in the very first issue along with the rest of the first-year Decepticon toys, and they almost make it 20 issues in, but unfortunately in the 19th issue, they come face to face with a gigantic Autobot defense base, Omega Supreme, an encounter that only Megatron and Laserbeak managed to survive. Unfortunately, Buzzsaw, along with Rumble and Frenzy and the original three Seekers, Skywarp, Thundercracker, and Starscream, aren't as lucky and are all unalived in the battle. Fortunately, Buzzsaw and company are eventually brought back online, benefits of being a robot, I guess, and Buzzsaw gets his revenge on Omega Supreme when he surprisingly takes down the giant in a Decepticon attack. But his victory is short-lived as only a few pages later, Buzzsaw and Laserbeak are fried big time by an underbase powered Starscream, both birds basically being victims of their toys getting discontinued in stores. Much later on though, in the more modern IDW Comics universe, both Laserbeak and Buzzsaw are present at the very start, with a twist. See, up to that point, for the most part, Laserbeak and Buzzsaw, along with Ravage, were basically treated as, well, for lack of a better word, Soundwave's pets. In that they weren't really full-fledged Decepticons, in the sense that they acted like animals who didn't talk. But in the IDW universe, all three could converse as well as any other Cybertronian, and only differed from everyone else due to their beast modes. In fact, because of this, they were viewed by Cybertronian society as second-class citizens and outcasts. As the story goes, Ravage and the Birds, hey, that would make a great band name, meet up with an equally lost Soundwave and help him control his natural but overwhelming telepathic abilities, thus forging a lasting partnership and friendship amongst them. It's quite the poignant start, and in stark contrast to years later in the 2018 cartoon Cyberverse, where Laserbeak is basically a member of a flock of Cybertronian birds that Soundwave captures and assigns as his partner. But I digress. Back to IDW, wherein Laserbeak and company eventually find themselves joining the Decepticon cause led by Megatron, who wins them over by treating them all as equals right from the very start. And speaking of joining causes, I do hope I can win you over to my cause of making this channel grow. Aside from liking, commenting, and subbing, which would still be very much appreciated, let's try something different this time. If you are enjoying this story or any other story on my channel, please share or recommend it to at least one of your friends. It would mean quite a lot and would definitely help me big time. But as always, any action you choose works for me, so thank you. Anyway, the original IDW continuity is one huge epic story that lasted 13 years and hundreds of issues. And while quite a number of classic and in some cases very obscure characters got their moments to shine, both Laserbeak and Buzzsaw were somewhat lost somewhere in the middle. Much like in the Marvel comics, they were constantly present in numerous storylines, but not really figuring in as major characters or players. In fact, towards the end of the run, they were oftentimes relegated into side commentators and comedic relief, giving off a classic Statler and Waldorf vibe. All they lacked was a balcony box. But in the end, both birds got their final time to shine, battling against Unicron and an overwhelming Maximal fleet led by Bludgeon. While initially the naturally cowardly Laserbeak opted to flee, he was convinced by Buzzsaw to fight alongside fellow Cybertronians Cosmos and Skybite, and was pretty much instantly blown to bits. Cosmos and Skybite didn't last much longer either, but surprisingly, Buzzsaw survived. And after Unicron's defeat, he made his new home on Earth, in Africa, basically protecting elephants by hunting down and exterminating poachers. Quite the character shift from an evil Decepticon spy to a wildlife conservationist. But I guess surviving a world-ending encounter with a planet eater will do that to you. Anyway, while that was pretty much all there is to Buzzsaw, Laserbeak did manage to continue on in other Transformers iterations, mostly due to his status as Soundwave's de facto partner in crime. And due to the fact that the whole Walkman cassette combo pretty much went the way of the dodo after the 80s, it's quite interesting going through all the different alt modes Laserbeak went through to stay relevant alongside his master Soundwave. Case in point, this bird has transformed into a bomb for Cybertron Soundwave's stealth bomber, and as well as a Cybertronian data disk and data pad. But it was in the third live-action Transformers movie, Dark of the Moon in 2011, where Laserbeak pretty much transformed into anything and everything he damn well pleased. This was quite a unique version of Laserbeak who was cruel, violent, and sadistic. I mean, this guy actually shot down a vulture for kicks. He was an alien-ish, snake-necked bird thing that, like I said, transformed into pretty much anything, from a flat-screen TV to a photocopying machine and a pink bumblebee. No, really, we have the toy to prove that. And speaking of toys, you can also add a laser gun and some sort of VTOL aircraft to the list. Basically anything this extremely evil and creepy version of Laserbeak could use to get up close to his targets and accomplish his main role as Soundwave's hitman. On the small screen, we got possibly my favorite alt mode for Laserbeak from 2007's Transformers Animated, where he transformed into an electric guitar. Yup, you heard that right, a freaking guitar of death that Soundwave used to unleash sonic chaos onto the poor Autobots, long before Eddie Munson rocked out Master of Puppets on the Demo Bats in the Upside Down. Laserbeak has also been a pretty bland drone-looking thing that fits seamlessly into a very awesome version of Soundwave from Transformers Prime in 2010. Fortunately, in the sequel series Robots in Disguise in 2015, Laserbeak gets a more traditional-looking bird mode that transformed into a gun turret to complement Soundwave's armored truck alt mode. Anyway, while we're on the topic of Laserbeak variants, let's stray a little bit further into a couple of characters that I think are worth mentioning despite technically having nothing in common with the Decepticon bird aside from the fact that they both can fly and are named Laserbeak, or Laserbeak in one case. But despite being completely different characters, both of them can be considered as homages to the original G1 Laserbeak. First up is a character named Laserbeak from the Beast Wars toy line way back in 1997. And while he looked nothing like the original, I mean he transformed into a pteranodon for Pete's sake, his motto on his tech specs was similar to the G1 Beak in that the only point that they liked about their enemies is their melting point. Oh, and just for the sake of mentioning it, there is also a Beast Wars character named Buzzsaw, but well, I couldn't really find any callbacks to the original G1 Buzzsaw except they were both yellow-ish? The second Laserbeak homage would be a little drone-like transformer from the 2002 series Transformers Armada. This little guy was a triple changer who could transform between a bird, camera, and laser gun. Anyway, his main role was to protect the Autobot human allies, Rad, Carlos, and Alexis. And while this Laserbeak sported a predominantly bright orange color, original toy prototypes had him in black and red as a callback to the original Laserbeak. But since one of his modes was a gun, sorta, this original color palette was scrapped to work around toy gun laws. Anyway, after all that, things have pretty much gone full circle for the birds, as almost all current toys of Laserbeak and the Buzzsaw have transformed back into tapes, or well, shields that looked like tapes in the case of the more recent Siege and Earthrise versions of the birds. Of course, when it comes to the slavishly G1 masterpiece toys in both official Takara or third-party versions from Robot Paradise, a traditional cassette tape Laserbeak and Buzzsaw as well are pretty much a given. And even in the cartoons, Laserbeak actually managed to make a surprise return as a cassette in the Transformers Kids series Rescue Bots Academy, where he is, well, rescued by the bots, and after the initial hijinks of having to chase him down, he is ultimately repaired by the rescue bots and, well, joins the academy as an Autobot. Laserbeak. Autobot. Now, that's something I never thought would come to pass, as I always figured he was forever loyal to the Decepticons, just like his fellow deploy Cassetticon, Ravage. If you want to know more about this cool cat, you can check out his story over here. Or if you want other Transformers stories, you can check out this playlist over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope you come back for more.